Hello, this is George from George's Music Blog, and today I'm talking about some more of my favourite electronic albums from 2025. Part 1 to this video is linked below in case you want to check that out too. And like that video, while I've given this the eye-catching title of Best Electronic Albums, these are really just some of my favourites. I didn't manage to listen to all music last year. Well done to anybody who did. The response to part 1 of this video was way above what I was expecting, and I just want to say a massive thank you to everyone who watched and subscribed. Today I'm going to be covering some dreamy ambient, dystopian techno, hypnotic beats, and loads more besides. So I hope you find something more to enjoy here. And finally, I've added links for where you can find all of these releases in the description below. So with all that out of the way, let's get into it. Oneohtrix Point Never, Tranquilizer. Obviously this was a big release for a lot of people last year. Daniel Lopatin is, I was tempted to say, kind of a Marmite artist in that you either love his music or hate it, but it's more the case that there's people who like his music and people who love it. On the whole, I would put myself in the former camp. I came to Oneohtrix Point Never fairly late on, having tried and failed a few times in the 2010s to see what all the fuss was about. Then a friend recommended him to me around 2020, and I really got into Replica and to a lesser extent R+7. I've never really cracked his mid-2010s stuff. Albums like Garden of Delete and his more recent output frustrates me a little bit. I was almost going to say there's something a bit Empress New Clothes about it, but instead I'll just say for now that it hasn't clicked with me as yet. But Tranquilizer appealed to me right away on the very first listen, and I could tell it contains so much of what I do love about his music, which is those sudden brief moments of beauty and profundity crafted from the most unexpected of elements. It's impossible to talk about Oneohtrix Point Never and not reference nostalgia, how he traffics in the endlessly recycled and repurposed sounds and memes that constitute the detritus of postmodern culture. Tranquilizer has its origins in a set of sample packs that Lopatin stumbled across during the pandemic in the Internet Archive before bookmarking them and then forgetting about them. Looking to come back to them some years later, he found the archive had momentarily vanished before then suddenly reappearing again. This coming in and out of focus, out of existence really, is what he set out to capture on this record. In his words, to capture the emotional register of an era where everything is archived but perpetually slipping away. The source material is full of the kind of functional, plasticky sounds that you can imagine being used as background m-Ziq for commercial spaces. And it's part of what distinguishes Lopatin's music that he creates such beautiful profundity out of such banal materials. He talks about making something that has reverence for the magic already in the source material and not leaving things out, even if they're ugly. As a listening experience, Tranquilizer could very broadly be described as ambient, but it is altogether too unpredictable and shot through with sudden changes in mood or volume as new sounds and atmospheres suddenly encroach into the mix to really be considered that way. And for the same reason, I find it doesn't play too well as background listening. I tend to get lost not knowing whether I'm in the same track I was in a minute ago, and the music kind of disintegrates into the random jumble of its component parts. So, very much an album that benefits from active listening. There's so much more I could say here, but I will wind up by saying that this is an excellent release by Daniel Lopatin, and from what I've seen of most of the critical response, it generally agrees that it is one of his best for a long time. So, don't sleep on it if you somehow still haven't checked it out, or if you have, then please let me know what you think. Mu-ziq, 1979. Mike Paradinas has just been on the form of his life in the last few years, as far as I'm concerned. For someone who could quite easily retreat into his comfort zone and trot out variations of the same material year after year, he seems to keep on discovering new aspects and facets to his sound. Okay, sure, a couple of recent releases do retread old ground. 2022's Magic Pony Ride was a jolly canter through the kind of acidy breakbeat brain dance that you feel he could turn out in his sleep. But generally, Mikey P is keeping it fresh with variations on his trademark sound. And with 1979, a return to the moodier ambient sound he introduced on 1977, 2 years ago. Unsurprisingly, that record drew inspiration from his early childhood and musical influences, and as a sequel to that record, 1979 is in part inspired by a trip to Majadahonda in Spain, where Paradis' family hail from and where he spent time as a child. The emotional territory of nostalgia is one that has been extensively explored in electronic music, and fair play to Paradis, he doesn't go in for any of the usual cliches, and I wouldn't even describe 1979 as a nostalgic record. The only thing really, and the same applies to 1977, is the use of traditional synthesizers and a strain of kind of proggy new ageism almost. Just a hint though, be assured this is pretty far removed from any kind of quirkiness or oddballness that some of his 90s output would tend towards. The majority of the record comprises ambient vignettes that tend to explore one idea. Heavily reverbed clanks and chimes give depth to sustained drones or ghostly synth refrains and arpeggios. Mu-ziq's music is often characterized by a kind of maximal more is more approach, where he tends to pile up layer after layer of hooks and riffs, but here he really allows space for his ideas to breathe. Emotionally, it's a downbeat, reflective record on the whole, so it's not an album you're necessarily going to want to listen to day in and day out, but Paradis peppers it with enough brighter pieces to prevent the mood from really getting down in the dumps. It's worth noting as well that this record has a companion piece, Manzana, released shortly afterwards, I think, and to be honest, I haven't even touched that one yet. It feels a little bit churlish to complain about too much music, but it does kind of bug me a little bit when artists do the old double release. It just makes each album feel a tiny bit less special, and I'm sort of left confused about which one I'm supposed to listen to. Anyway, like I said, churlish, I guess I should just listen to both of them. If you have, then let me know in the comments which one do you think is the best. Wagon Christ, Planet Roll. Well, Luke Vibert is back as Wagon Christ, but then Luke Vibert never really went away. Surely he has to be the most prolific of all the old 90s IDM Electronica crew. I haven't sat down to do the sums, but Discogs says 19 albums under Luke Vibert, 8 under his Wagon Christ alias, and that's before you even get to his work as Carrier District, Eamon Andrews, Plug, the list goes on and on. I have never attempted to keep up with all his releases. Maybe one day I will clear my listening schedule and just have a run at the full Luke Vibert discography, as he is responsible for some of my favourite electronic music. When it comes to a Wagon Christ album, you know what you're getting. A sense of mischief, fun, a little bit of naughtiness, breaks that run the groove from down-tempo / trip-hop up to breakbeat and occasionally venturing as far as jungle. Squelchy acid lines, dreamy synths, and oh yeah, samples. A shit ton of samples. I would love to see this guy's record collection. Hip-hop, funk, soul, disco, old TV series and public service announcements. Nowhere is safe from Luke's sampler. The clamour of voices, sound effects, snippets and often familiar music gives his records a riotous sense of fun, something often lacking in this genre. And by reusing certain samples across different albums, you get the feeling that you're really inhabiting Luke's musical universe. Sometimes I have to admit it's a little bit much for me, and I kind of wish he'd lock into more of a groove rather than constantly jumping around the radio dial. So my favourite stuff of his tends to be when he sticks to a certain genre. So Drum and Bass for Papa by Plug, which is just exceptional. It's not drum and bass at all really, more like sort of cinematic jungle. Absolutely fantastic if you're into that kind of late 90s liquid jungle meets experimental breakbeat sort of sound. And then also Yosef, which was released under his own name, which is basically straight up acid house. With his Wagon Christ material, I find it a bit harder to differentiate, to tap into something that makes a record stand out. But yeah, at the end of the day, it is all good. Great record for a pre-party warm-up or just to cheer yourself up. And the samples are so densely packed, there is always something new to find. And to be honest, I'm just chuffed that Luke Vibert is still active and releasing music. Client 3, Testbed Assembly. Now, I'm sure someone out there knows the true identity of Client 3, in addition to Client 3 themselves, of course. But for now, to all intents and purposes, they are officially anonymous, an electro burial, if you like, before Burial's identity became public. I came to this release relatively late last year, but I knew as soon as the first bars of You Are a Machine came through my headphones that this was going to be right up my street. Old school electro is the starting point essentially, so nothing majorly new or groundbreaking, but just that style executed to perfection. Ice cold and funky as hell. If you like James Shinra, who I covered in my previous video, then you will find much to enjoy here. In fact, one of the tracks, Decommission Me, is a collaboration with Shinra. Overall, the production on Testbed Assembly is sparser, less detailed and dense than Shinra's, but still shot through with that same muscular rhythm, spacey atmospherics, and urgent synth lines. The beats are jacking, the bass is pumping and acidic. This whole man meets machine shtick of electro, which was futuristic, I guess, in the 80s, and by the 90s was ripe for nostalgic retro send-up, has now become kind of weirdly unnerving. Now that we're all jaded by social media and our attention spans at the mercy of all-powerful algorithms and living in anticipation of the AI apocalypse, that atonal voice on "You Are a Machine" telling me that I am a machine and I feel nothing kind of feels like less of a joke than it would have a few years ago. As a whole release, Testbed Assembly is not the most varied listening experience, and the tracks do tend to blur together a little bit after an hour, but to be fair, I don't think it's massively intended for home listening. And although the vibe is predominantly on the kind of darker, menacing side, a few of the latter cuts, optimism output node, responsibility optimization, and probably the most romantically titled survival companion candidate explorer offer a more uplifting emotional outlook with some twinkling melodic lines. And it is also worth mentioning the final track, The Last Human, which is a collaboration with Lorne, who I have to put my hands up, I have not properly listened to, but I know a lot of you will have. That one offers a more experimental angle to the project's sound with a writhing bass line that sounds like an algorithm being embodied and brought to life, I guess, after all the humans are dead. Overall, exceptional stuff if you like cerebral music that's designed to make you move. Like Shinra, I'd say this is the most apt example of anything that deserves the name brain dance. So if we're all going to get made defunct by machines soon, then at least we've got some sick tunes to play us out. Polygonia, Dream Horizons. Here is an artist who I'm going to be listening to a lot more of. Polygonia first came to my attention through her collaboration with Rose on Dermatology in 2024, an album of slippery psychedelic techno characterized by propulsive rhythms and some very tactile sounds and textures. Rather than focusing on the micro world of skin, Dream Horizons takes a far more expansive view, as well as incorporating more varied styles. There's elements of early noughties minimal glitch / micro house, the hyperactive rhythms of footwork, the driving minimalism of Richie Hawtin, as well as the occasional incursion of very kind of European sounding jazz influence. Think Jan Jelinek's experiments at reducing avant-garde jazz to glitchy minimalism on an album like Loop Finding Jazz Records. Opening track Crystal Valley has something in it that reminds me of the track 9 by Oneohtrix off Amber. Not just the cold and metallic sound palette, but also the suggestion of a wide open space and a sense of anticipation, very scene-setting kind of vibe. The album is not particularly Oneohtrix-ish, I just kind of wanted to mention that as a familiar reference. On the rest of the album, multi-instrumentalist Lindsay Wang flexes her skills across a spectrum of genres, deconstructing and rebuilding them in myriad beautiful ways. So we've got Soul Reflections, which begins as very kind of Ricardo Villalobos-esque minimal techno, onto which Polygonia layers endless drum fills to create an endlessly twirling fractal, or Metaphysical Scribbles, which is underpinned by a restless, fidgety breakbeat that gets into a dance-off with cut-up wordless vocal samples, or Secret Desire, which I can't help but think refers to the pulsing bass drum that forces its way into the low end of this tottering beat sculpture. The album was recorded entirely in Ableton, with the only hardware being her saxophone, violin and flute, plus our own sampled vocalizations and inhalations, which add a sort of trippy, organic warmth to the electronic sculptures. Whenever I put this record on, I just find myself getting sucked in by the insistent rhythms, fantastic sound design, and deeply engaging mixes. Wholeheartedly recommend this one if you're into the weirder side of techno. Sandwell District, End Beginnings. Sandwell District are the legendary collective who, I guess you could say, defined a sound in techno for a generation. First as a label, and then with their album Feed Forward, released under the artist name Sandwell District in 2010. The group included Carl O'Connor, best known by his Regis alias, Dave Sumner, also known as Function, and Juan Mendez, otherwise known as Silent Servant, who was also a graphic designer and responsible for the group's inky black visual aesthetic. So positively a techno supergroup, and their rock and roll excesses reportedly lived up to some of the classic supergroups of the 1970s before Regis and Function acrimoniously parted ways around 2013. In a tragic loss to the electronic music world, Silent Servant died at the start of 2024, but not before sowing the seeds of a reconciliation between Carl and Dave and the creation of new Sandwell District material. Given the legendary status of their initial releases, the pressure of expectation was always going to weigh heavy on this one. So yeah, while these tracks share a lot in common with Feed Forward, they're just missing something of that grit, the coldness, the kind of desolate industrial feel that made those works so iconic. End Begins is just a little bit softer around the edges, where Feed Forward was the emotional equivalent of like a brick in a sock and didn't give a fuck what you felt. End Beginnings is just a little bit more emotionally inviting, relatively speaking. Definitely worth checking out if you want some driving warehouse techno with an industrial vibe and some ice cold melodies. Sherelle with a Vengeance. I seem to only manage to get into one jungle record each year, something I want to try and improve for 2026. And last year it was With a Vengeance by Sherelle, producer and DJ, including winner of DJ Mag's Best British DJ in 2020, and for a time holder of a residency on Radio 1. To be fair, With a Vengeance isn't strictly jungle, but takes in footwork, hardcore, old school rave, acid, and bass music from the upper reaches of the BPM scale. This album is Sherelle coming back from adversity after getting mugged en route to Amsterdam in 2023 and losing a laptop containing the files of what would have been her debut album. That's a horrific loss to come back from for any producer or creative, and she definitely is back with a vengeance with this sparse, high energy and confrontational record fused from the skeletal forms of high-tempo dance music. Nearly all of With a Vengeance exists in that moment of pure tension and anticipation that comes before a drop as energy is building on the dance floor. I feel like a lot of these tracks would work well as kind of bridges to build tension between one floor filler and another, because at no point really does Sherelle fully release the pressure and let a beat drop. The first 4 tracks are variations on the same formula of wailing sirens, vocal stabs, staccato chop breaks, bass, and little else. It's gloriously desolate and brutal, but it builds this kind of manic, unhinged energy. Then midway through, Freaky, brackets just my type, turns things down a notch by being a slow jam by comparison and featuring some sugar-coated vocals from George Riley. The latter half of the album returns to even more punishing sonic territory than the first though. Ready, Steady, Go is 6 minutes of brutal minimalism, kicks, claps, sirens, bass, but it is speed, brackets endurance, which is probably the most surprising cut, essentially hard techno, which just unleashes this savage 303 line after a minute and a half of percussive onslaught. Brilliantly bracing stuff if you're into the plus 160 BPM zone. Voices from the Lake 2. Okay, I got a ton of music recommendations in response to part 1 of this video, so thank you so much to everyone who suggested them. I will do my best to listen to as many as I can. One that I got into straight away was suggested by Dems not sure if that username is intended to be said out loud. Anyway, that is the second installment of the collaboration between Donato Dozzi and Giuseppe Diliecci. Apologies for any mispronunciation. Voices from the Lake. I'm aware of Donato Dozzi having legendary status in techno, and his album Magda was one of my favourites of 2024. It can be hard to describe this kind of music without resorting to the same old list of adjectives. Hypnotic, deep, layered, mesmerising, subtle, etc. But that just doesn't really do it justice. Neither does simply describing it as techno or ambient techno, all of which just seem too reductive. At the end of the day, this is just beautiful, spellbinding music, and whatever meaning you want to find in it is up to you, really. The narrative of this album is defined by a small handful of what I might call inflection points. The first comes midway through the third track, B-spin, with the introduction of a piano motif way down in the mix, which has this effect A bit like if you were going up a very tall building in an elevator with no windows and suddenly stepped out onto the 30th floor to be greeted by a panoramic view. Maybe that's not quite right, it's more subtle than that. Let's just call it a perception altering moment where a small change suddenly makes everything seem totally different. There's another in the transition from m-Ziq to mono no koto, where some simple chords are introduced as a through line which then just carry you on this journey, and before you know it, everything around you is altered. There's nothing remotely resembling a drop on this record, no massive build-ups or climaxes, just very subtle changes and these little moments of drama or even wonder. As a point of detail, it's worth mentioning that both the vinyl release and the version on streaming platforms is mixed, so there are 10 tracks blended seamlessly together. As a bonus on streaming, you can also listen to the whole mix as one 45-minute track. But beware if you're buying the vinyl and wanting to DJ these tracks, because you won't be able to. It looks like the only way to get the original unmixed versions is as digital files. Anyway, this is absolutely superlative stuff, and I will definitely be checking out volume 1 of Voices from the Lake and spending some more time with Donato Dozzo's discography. The Black Dog, Loud Ambient. Well, if anyone deserves the label OGs of electronic music, it's the Black Dog. Formed in the late 1980s as a trio of Ken Downey, Ed Handley and Andy Turner, with their first releases in 1989 melding Detroit techno, electro and breakbeats, they are some of the true originators, arguably there before Aphex, Autechre and so many more. The trio split in the 90s, of course, with Ed and Andy forming Plaid and Ken going his own way. The most recent iteration of the Black Dog came together in 2005 when Martin and Richard Dust, not to be confused with those Dust brothers, joined Ken to create a darker, leaner and more brooding sound. Since then, they continued to refine their own style, brutal ambient, and have been incredibly prolific and consistent. From around 2018, they ramped things up even more, often putting out 2 albums a year, sometimes pure ambient, often inspired by the increasingly dystopian pallor of modern society, and on other records leaning towards more straight up techno, often produced on analog hardware and pulsing with the beat of their native Sheffield, a landmark city in the evolution of electronic music. I've not listened to all of these albums, but every one that I have found something to enjoy. Loud Ambient leans much more towards straight up techno and is probably their most emotionally uplifting record in years. So shocking then to hear the very sad news of Ken Downey's death in December 2025, which came as a complete surprise to me anyway. It wouldn't be right to speculate on any of the circumstances around that, and I don't know what it means for the future of the Black Dog, if there is to be any, now that they have lost the one constant that defined the group's identity. So if this is something of a swan song, then it seems fitting that the Black Dog has gone out on this note. Loud and proud, soulful, forward-thinking electronic music beating with the industrial heartbeat of their native Sheffield. Pure, timeless techno. RIP to the legend Ken Downey. Okay, that is it from me. Please let me know your thoughts and your standout releases from last year if they weren't on this list. And do check out part 1 to this video if you haven't already, or even better, why not go and listen to some of the music that I've just talked about. Thanks so much for watching. Goodbye.